All
So,
right.
let me start this off here. I hear the argument quite a bit, and I don't like it. Usually it's in forums or Reddit, Twitter, etc. that Dungeons and Dragons is not a video game, and they use it as a point to counteract certain player behaviors, I suppose. So I think that D&D is a video game in pretty much every sense of the word that matters. So, what do you think? I can unpack that if you want, but
So
go ahead.
ultimately, I literally just looked it up. The very first definition of a video game is a game played by electronically manipulating images produced by a computer program on a television screen or other display screen.
Okay.
Fun fact, the majority of games now are being played online. The majority. We know it. The stats are there. Most people are playing online. Even though a lot of people would prefer to play in person, ultimately more games are being played online.
Okay.
And that ultimately leads me to believe that D&D is, in fact, a video game in that sense. By that incredibly simple definition.
Right. But obviously people aren't using it for that definition. I want to,
Yes.
so what do you think is the common, I have some ideas, but I want to hear from some, well, it's unfortunately, if you agree with me, we're not going to get very far here.
Well, I don't agree. Well, we'll be getting into why I don't agree with.
All right, let's get to the point. Let's get to those points. Let's get to the part where we disagree. So we found common ground. It is literally a video game. Let's find the nuances to that. Let's find the nuances to that definition. Go for it.
Alrighty. Ultimately, a video game is a program with a set of strict guidelines and rules. You cannot deviate from those strict guidelines and rules. You cannot do something like in Dark Souls. You can't jump, for example. You can't jump straight up because in Dark Souls, you're not allowed to jump straight up. In Dark Souls, you're not allowed to push over the building. In Dark Souls, you're not allowed to do, you're not allowed to climb over the wall.
Right? Okay.
And ultimately, Dungeons and Dragons has a whole bunch of nuance outside of the coding of the game that makes it beyond any video game ever.
Yes, it does. So do you think, so I have two questions to that. First of all, so we're saying that D&D does not have those restrictions. In what way is that? Yeah, go ahead.
No, you.
So if I were to say, so we can say that, okay, I'm a level 1, whatever. I'm a level 1 human fighter. I walk outside. I'm looking at the moon. I want to jump to the moon. The DM would obviously, you can't. That would be a restriction so in what way is that not a restriction to the definition you gave?
Well, that's a self-imposed restriction, right? Because ultimately I could say, yeah, you jump to the moon. I could say that. And the fact that I have that option to say, yes, you can, to any ridiculous nonsense is what separates that from the hard coding.
I feel like with mods that you can, I think that definition is too loose. Because video games can be changed. Anything that you like, we would need an example of something that you can do in D&D that you can't do in a video game if you set out to do that, I guess. That's kind of an interesting. I agree that D&D is strictly, your imagination, and you're allowed to do what you will with it. But I think that doesn't stop it from being like a video game in the traditional sense. I think that if a video game could get to that point, like D&D is the perfect example of what D&D is the pinnacle of what a video game could be. It is like the perfect video game. Say that. I'll word it that way.
So D&D is the best video game is the stance you're taking.
Right. My stance is that D&D is where every video game should eventually is the goal that every video game is trying to reach.
I think
or rather the definition of video game, I should say. My definition of video game. I'm not saying that like Minecraft is trying to be like D&D. I'm saying that a video game, D&D's the power of D&D and like your imagination being able to do so much with so little effort. As far as, you can like just imagine things into existence. I think that video games should strive for that. It's really hard to put into words, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, putting a cap on imagination is quite literally impossible. Like, that's just the bottom line of it. I think ultimately what separates a video game from a tabletop role-playing game is the fact that all video games, except for maybe like a select few, were designed with limitations in mind, versus D&D and subsequently a lot of tabletop role-playing games. They are designed without limitations in mind. Obviously, some more than others, right? Like, you could say that 5e is a lot more limiting than original D&D. You could say that Call of Cthulhu is more limiting than, whatever the frick indie little thing, whatever.
All right, so let me bring it back around.
Yeah.
The DM does put in some way or shape or form. A DM does put limitations. They may have the option to remove them, but at some point they do put limitations. So let's go so we can agree on that. I'm pretty sure. So a video game also does this in the same way that a video game does. So let's go from there.
Yeah, so I think that limitations are always put up because limitations are generally it's generally a lot more fun to play in a box than outside of a box, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's typically better to play within a set of structured guides and rules. And once again, always comparing back to Dark Souls because Dark Souls is great. Dark Souls, you could look at it like a tiny linear like graph forward, versus D&D. The freedom of choice is just so exponentially large. It dwarfs all video games. And the fact that they're so incomparable in the approach, design, philosophy, and execution means that as of right now, D&D and video games are separate. Maybe in 50 years when we're all living in the VR machine, Ready Player One, maybe that'll change. But as of right this second, video games are just incomparable.
Okay, so here I want to clarify something I said earlier about D&D being the pinnacle. So a video game, we're going to use Dark Souls because you like Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a video game, we can agree, but D&D is not. And you said that it's because of the options, your limitless options. So if Dark Souls had limitless options, would it still be a video game?
Oof.
If we were to maybe through deep learning, maybe through AI, if Dark Souls was to somehow become limitless in options and content, maybe through what's it called when procedural generation, whatever, AI, procedural generation, deep learning, through somehow or through some way, Dark Souls became infinite and gave you infinite options, would it still be a video game?
I think it'd be more like an experience. It's so like, obviously these are things that we are going to have to talk about at some point, like in a few years, the AIs are absolutely going to be generating these like limitless possibilities that we just can't fathom right now. But
yeah, that's kind of the foundation of where I'm coming from, is everything that we appreciate about D&D, a video game is trying to do. And I think that the two can be used. I think that D&D is a video game. Really, everything that makes a video game fun is what makes D&D fun. People will say, "Well, you don't have to fight the enemy. You can role play out of it. You can like pick up a rock and throw it. You have all these different options that make D&D unique." And in the same way, I could say, "Well, if a video game does that, is it still a video game?" And you would probably say yes. So everything that gets brought up is like D&D is not a video game because you can do these things. It's like, well, if a video game could do that, I feel like it would still be a video game. So it's hard to walk back how many restrictions we have to put on D&D before it becomes a video game compared to how much growth or how much expansion to a video game before it's no longer a video game. And I just feel like I feel comfortable just getting rid of that wherever that blurred line is. I feel like just getting rid of it.
Yeah, I think at some point, for sure, in hopefully our lifetimes, that line will absolutely be just gone, because once again, we're going to put on our VR headsets and we're going to be playing, all these awesome, dope games or whatever, right? But as of right now, as of today, I think that there is a hard line between what is to be expected from a video game and what is to be expected from a tabletop role-playing game. And currently, with our limited imagination versus computers' lack of artificial intelligence, I think there's certainly a barrier there, and at some point I hope it's deleted.
So you actually believe that the definition will change over time? But
Yeah,
you're not
time, sure.
yeah, but you're not comfortable with that definition just yet.
Well, what I will say is, so one of the cruxes of this debate is D&D a video game? And ultimately, what I would say to that is like, when you say D&D, are you saying D&D as in D&D 5th edition, or are you saying D&D as the analogous tabletop role-playing game?
I think I'm comfortable with saying that's actually a really good question.
Because a lot of the times when people say, a lot of people say Band-Aid, even though they pick up an adhesive tape. D&D is the adhesive tape or the Band-Aid of tabletop role-playing games.
I'm willing to say this, but I'm willing to have my mind changed on this. I think that TTRPGs are video games. I think I'm willing to say that, but I'm open to having my mind changed on that. I think TTRPGs are video games.
What I will say to that is, not all tabletop role-playing games are video games, but some are. And
that's interesting.
To that, I would say that comes down to the individual rule set. There are some rule sets which say, hey, play these rules by these rules. And by that case, you are playing a purely limited form and function. Much like when you hop into a video game, you're playing with a limited form and function. But there are other tabletop role-playing games where you pick it up and you can have at it what you will. There are less rules, or there are a bunch of rules, but it says, hey, don't use them all. Do whatever.
Valid. Somebody in chat said, I think a video game has no DM. So if a video game were to have a DM, would it still be a video game? I'll let you answer that.
That's already been done, because if you
Divinity.
do what do you call it? Divinity, right? Divinity literally has a DM function, and there's been other games too. I'm trying to remember. There was a game that was so bad it got removed from Steam. Do you remember that Sword Coast adventure?
I do not remember.
There was a D&D game, and it was literally like Divinity, but it was regarded as so ill reviewed that it was taken off of Steam.
Oh no!
It was Sword Coast Adventures, and that had a DM version or DM function where you could be the DM.
Divinity has a rule set, not a DM. So here's my question for No Fun. You can answer this for the chat if you like, but I'll ask the chat as well. If an AI, an artificial intelligence application, was a dungeon master, would it be a video game or a tabletop RPG?
I would ultimately say tabletop role-playing game right today.
It would be both?
I would say
or somebody in chat said both.
Yeah, right. Both. Yeah, I mean ultimately, if this AI was, just able to come up with awesome role play on the spot and be able to bend the rules, the rules aren't rigid. But if this is an AI where the rules are rigid, then I'd see it as a video game.
Is an AI considered to be alive? Yeah, we're getting meta here.
So something important to discuss here is when we say AI, we're not meeting true artificial intelligence. So there is a very, very significant difference between artificial intelligence and the computer AIs that we're kind of talking about.
Yeah, I'm talking about a simple. It doesn't even have to be a good AI. Just a machine that runs a D&D game. Well, it runs a D&D game well. It procedurally generates the dungeons. It procedurally generates NPCs and descriptions. It can respond to you very well. Like you say, hey, I'm going to the tavern, and the voice recognition will say, okay, it generates a tavern, it generates an NPC, and then it says back, the AI actually says back to you, hey, welcome to the tavern name. Are we playing D&D or are we playing a video game? Because I feel like, all right, so I think this is a safe point to say, here's where the line is. Let's see what side of the line we're on right now.
Yeah, and like I said, I think as of like, if we had this AI today, I would still say that it's, I mean, like it's able to do things that are outside, like deviate from the norm. Then I would say that it is a, essentially both. But I think that if this AI could not deviate outside of the norm, then I would say that's more along the lines of a video game.
Okay. Somebody in the chat, I want to address something somebody in the chat said. One of them is a video game. You mostly play with a console or PC. TTRPG you play with online. So if there was a phone app that did this and you had a physical tabletop setting and then the AI ran that, would that, or if you did video of the mind with an AI, would that be a video game? By that specific definition. I think we're kind of drifting away from video game there.
Well, and not only that, but also for that question, we you might have missed it, but more games of D&D are being played right now online versus being played in person.
Yeah,
so we're already past the tipping point.
Yeah, we both agree. We both agree on that literal definition of video game. We have to open an application, Roll20, Firefox, Chrome, whatever. Go to the website, Roll20. We have a graphics. We have a screen with handouts, tokens that move across. We have a character sheet. I mean, we have an actual a program that does things that the DM. I mean, we're basically playing Divinity at that point. I mean, we're basically playing a video game, but the argument is always, but you have all these infinite options. So.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think in a few years, once those options can be handled outside of like traditional means, then absolutely, then the line's gone. But it's going to take a little bit of time. Yeah. Hopefully, not too long. But
the reason that I want to hone in on that is because a bad AI could be, or I will say a good AI. A good AI may. How do I word this? A bad DM or a not very creative DM is a limit of its own, and it will have similar limitations to a good AI, for example.
And the best part is I'd rather have a bad AI than a bad DM because then it wouldn't be as awkward.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very interesting. But a majority of people would say, well, you're playing a video game if you're using the AI or at least the blurred line, and then it kind of has to be, and then it kind of has to go from how much AI versus how little DM. Because there's ways to play D&D solo. I just saw this on the DM's Guild where you play without a DM and you just kind of roll the die. That could that could easily be converted to an application right here and now. And people would say, so if I were to say I'm playing solo D&D with this thing I saw on DM's Guild, I wish I could remember the name of it, shout them out, but there's rules for playing solo D&D with no DM. It's just you and your dice, and you roll out, and then you do question conflicts.
Yeah.
If you were playing that game with dice, just you would say I'm playing a tabletop. But if you were to take everything about that and put it on your computer, you'd be playing a video game. Very, very interesting kind of way to think about that.
True.
Is World of Warcraft considered a TTRPG? So the thing is that I think all TTRPGs are video games, but not all video games are TTRPGs.
Yep. Absolutely. And World of Warcraft is absolutely a video game. So.
Right. I think video game is a very broad category. All right, chat. Does anybody disagree? Well, actually, no fun. Yeah, where do we go from here? Hit me. What you got? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like, obviously it kept on streaming in there every once in a while, but specifically in regards of AI, what is artificial intelligence? That is obviously a question that is going to be coming up, and it's been coming up because I don't know if you've seen, but AI art has been killing it recently.
I want to
AI
get
art
into
has
that.
been popping off, and
Oh,
yeah, we're not going to get into it here, but
yeah, I mean, I want to get into it. Like, I want to generate NPCs with it for sure, and
but
characters.
but ultimately, that's not like artificial intelligence. That is just a program working within the confines. But the AI that we want to DM is going to be incredibly complex because we're going to feed it all the rules, and then we have to feed it, a whole bunch of things to not work with the rules, and that'll be incredibly awkward to start with. Like, there's no way that the AI is not going to bug out, but eventually it'll get good. Eventually. And
Eventually.
I ultimately see a future where instead of having to decide who's the DM, everyone can just come together and play a game. And it'll truly be like a unique game because like it'll generate its own adventures, and you'll meet NPCs that are flavorful and unique and fun, and like that'll be fan freaking tastic.
I agree. That will be fantastic. That goes back to what I said earlier. D&D is like the pinnacle of what a video game could be.
And that's what I will suspect though is we're gonna get like maybe 50 years down the line, we put on our VR headsets and play D&D super duper advanced. It's still gonna be one D&D 50 years in the future, but
Two
but
D&D. D&D.
maybe it'll be two D&D by then. But ultimately, what I think is there's gonna be a retro calling, and there's gonna be like these kids that are like, man, screw these robots. I want to run D. I'm gonna run a game,
Oh
and
my
like that'll be
gosh.
hip.
Going back.
That's what I think is going to happen. I think there's going to be kids that'll be like, "Screw these robots! I'm going to run a game. That's going to be cool."
Oh man, dream of that day.
I think, and then like all the old people are like, "Screw you, kid! Back in my day, we didn't have an AI. I had to run that by myself."
All right. Yeah. So how do you feel about people using that as an argument? Before let's close it out here. How do you feel about people that? Go ahead.
I always assume they're doing it in a derogatory stance, right? Like what is the example of them saying, "Oh, D&D is or is not a video game"? Like, what is what's the kickoff of that?
Yeah, let me think of a good example. It's usually when you start trying to, I mean, even just saying the word gamify kind of has a negative to it. We'll say murder hoboing. Like a lot of times, murder hoboing will be accused of, oh, you're playing D&D like a video game when you murder hobo.
I mean, ultimately D&D spawned from that. Like the classic sentence for D&D is the dungeon was created before the town. Like the first people that played D&D before it was even called D&D, they start off in a dungeon. They got a bunch of gold after killing a bunch of monsters, and then they're like, "Cool, now what do we do with it?" So, ultimately, I think it's okay to say like do the murder hobo thing. I think that like, yeah, I mean, I think as of right now, like with how 5e is progressing, it's not the best way to play the game, but ultimately you can play it that way, and it's perfectly acceptable and fine.
All right, I agree. I'm gonna move on to the next caller. It's been fun.
We need to do one of those menage a trois where both of us.
You're right. I'm really hard to schedule with. Sometimes like this wasn't even planned until somebody was like, "Hey, man, I got a cool DM hotline." I was like, "Yeah, that's good content."
If only you had a consistent schedule.
If only. Go to my Patreon, everybody. Like, let me quit my job.
Hey, we went over this. Just charge $30 a session, and you'll be living.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. I'm also setting up my start playing. So those of you that are watching, you can do me and No Fun a favor right now by going to our start playing accounts and giving us a good review. It works off of a Kingmaker system, so Mine is start playing or games.startplaying /SteelySam /review, and no fun. You can plug your link. Is yours?
I'm sure it is. I'll grab it here. But yeah, basically, if you want to support your favorite YouTubers, then obviously liking, comment, subscribing goes an incredibly long way. But surprise, surprise, some of us are poor, and money is cool.
Money is pretty cool. All right, bud, you take it easy.
I'll try.
On what? So there's a website. Those of you that don't know, there's a website called Start Playing where DMs. It's basically a website for finding paid DMs, and it works off of Kingmaker. You go give them a thumbs up and a positive review, and it'll affect their overall score and make them easier to spot. So so this is going to be a video. Hey, everybody that's watching, if you're watching the VOD, I would like to convert you to popping by live. And before you rush to the comments with your arguments about how D&D is not a video game, I would like to invite you, those of you that have very strong opinions about this, to please come by a DM hotline. Let's discuss it. I love having these one-on-one discussions so I can actually ask questions. Sitting there typing back and forth and having arguments in the comment section, that's no fun. So you could post the comments and I'll read them, and I appreciate it. But having an actual discussion having an informed, intelligent discussion with people, that would be much more preferable. All are invited. I will argue with anyone, anywhere. So you're welcome to come by.